Thank you. Y'all come on in and Sheriff, how are you? Very well, yeah. Good to see you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being with us in the press room today. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge the individuals who are standing up here with me and thank them for their hard work on the area of criminal justice reinvestment and the changes that we need to make in our state going forward. Speaking today after me will be Secretary LeBlanc, Chief Justice Johnson, State Representative Walt Leger, Gene Mills, and Sheriff Weber. But I do want to express my appreciation for everyone who is here today and everyone who served on the task force as well, which just a few moments ago unanimously voted out a set of recommendations. And I understand that there was a little qualification on a few of those recommendations, which indicates we still have some work to do. That's always the case when you work the legislative process. But today, the Louisiana Justice Reinvestment Task Force delivered their report of 26 separate recommendations for changes in the law so that we can get the most public safety out of each taxpayer dollar spent on our criminal justice system. To the 14 members of the task force, a bipartisan group of experts, including representatives from all three branches of government, thank you for your tremendous work. Thank you for your good work. Criminal justice reform is a top priority for this legislative session, and I'm encouraged that we're starting on a foundation of strong bipartisan support. I'm confident that now is the time, and the only reason now is the time is because we didn't do it last year or the year before. But we shouldn't wait to do what we all know needs to be done now, and so now is the time. This legislative session that starts next month is when we have to be successful. By re-engineering our laws to better target those who threaten public safety and better treat those whose behavior is driven by addiction or mental illness, we can spend less money and actually have less crime, and in the process improve families and communities. That's a win-win that independents, Democrats, and Republicans alike can rally around. This is another issue where it is my hope, and quite frankly, it's my expectation that our approach will be as Louisianans, not as Democrats and Republicans. So thanks again for the terrific work of everyone who's been involved. Now, in many ways, the hard part starts, because we have to draft and refine legislation, work that legislation through the legislative process, compromise where possible and necessary, all to make sure that we are successful. So in just a moment, you're going to hear from Secretary LeBlanc, who has done a great job of chairing that task force. And after that, you're going to hear from Chief Justice Johnson and others. One of the things that I did want to point out, for those individuals who would like to look at the recommendations for themselves, they can go to the website, my office, the legislature's website, and to the Supreme Court's website. Those recommendations are going to be up, but since I'm speaking, I'm only going to plug mine. It's gov. It's gov.la.gov. Look, I want to just thank you all again for being here. We will take a few questions at the end of the remarks are going to be given as planned. But if I can get the chairman of the task force, Secretary LeBlanc, to come forward, I'd appreciate that.
Good. Happy anniversary. Is it your anniversary, guy? Okay. Okay. Good morning or good afternoon, whatever it is. I appreciate being here. Governor Edwards, legislators, on behalf of the Louisiana Justice Reinvestment Task Force It's certainly a privilege today to deliver this report containing 26 recommendations that, if implemented, will help strengthen public safety and curb taxpayer spending. And I would say with that, the recidivism is so important for people to understand, people not coming back to prison. That's a key component of this whole process. It's not letting people out of prison. This is about people not coming back. And as we know, 95% of the people that come to prison are coming back to our communities. We need to understand that. So, Governor, I appreciate you giving me this opportunity, certainly, and this is going to be the report for you to have. In 2015, Louisiana created the task force under House Concurrent Resolution 82, which directed us to chart a data-driven course for comprehensive reform. And I want to thank Representative Leger for authoring that piece of legislation. We have looked at just about every piece of data that's ever been collected on sentencing and corrections in Louisiana. We've studied the research on what works, on what doesn't work, to change criminal offender behavior. We have examined the laws in Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and other states that have seen big declines in both time and incarceration. And you heard the governor probably, if you were all in the committee room, speak a little bit about the results of that. This report is a result of a collaborative effort, and each of our recommendations is supported with data and research. To clarify, this report it's not a menu from which to choose one or two items. These recommendations work collectively as a multifaceted package which addresses all ends of the criminal justice spectrum. There are probably going to be some issues on that, whether it's going to be an omnibus bill or if it's going to be divided up. That'll be determined later on in this process. We want to direct more people to probation rather than prison, but to do that and get good results, we also need to strengthen probation and parole, and we need to make our caseloads more manageable. Also, in order to pay for the things in this report that cost money, we need to adopt the changes that save money. I urge you to approach the recommendations in this report as a package deal. These recommendations will save the state over $300 million in the next decade. $9 million of that savings would be in the first year. To get the best public safety outcomes, one of our recommendations is that you invest a substantial portion of that savings into the programs and services that reduce recidivism and strengthen public safety. In fact, as a jump start, I urge, and what's in the report you'll see, to invest 70% of those savings from year one back into these services, particularly into probation and parole, so that we may have enough officers to appropriately manage the temporary projected increase in this population that is discussed in more detail in the report. And I might add here that I'll make a little attaboy for my website. You can find it on the corrections website, too, just to let you know that. I'd like to give an overview of our findings and recommendations. The full report, which I encourage everyone to read, is posted on the websites, as we just talked about. And Louisiana has the highest, we've talked about it, the highest imprisonment rate in the country and in the world, doubling the national average. To pay for the corrections population, the state appropriates about $2/3 of $1 billion every year. $2/3 of $1 billion every year. Even with this huge investment of taxpayer funds, recidivism rates remain high. 1 in 3 people who leave prison in Louisiana return within 3 years. There's a huge body of research on what works to reduce recidivism, but many of our current laws and our budgetary decisions are not based on that research, not yet at least. They're based on theory that we need to be tough on crime in order to best protect our communities and stop people from continuing to commit crime. But the truth is that our state needs to be more than just tough, especially in a budget crisis. We need to be smart on crime. And I repeat, we need to be smart on crime. A chief reason that Louisiana leads the nation in imprisonment is this. We lock up people for nonviolent crimes far more than other states, coupled with the fact that we house roughly 50% of our state population at the local level in parish jails by way of a per diem that barely covers the cost to what I call lock and feed, much less provide rehab services and vocational training. We send people to prison for drug, property, and other nonviolent offenses at twice the rate of South Carolina and 3 times the rate of Florida. That's not because we have more crime than they have. Our crime rates are identical to theirs. It's because we've designed our laws and our funding decisions differently. More than half of those sent to prison each year are people who fail our community supervision. Again, more than half of the people that enter our prisons fail community supervision. And we know that if they are successful off of supervision, that recidivism rate drops from 50% to 20%. And that's a big part of what this package does, is work on our probation and parole division to help them get on their feet. Among those who aren't coming from supervision, those sentenced directly to prison by the courts, the most common offense is drug possession, as you heard the governor talk about. The 10 most common crimes admitted to prison are all nonviolent. Again, you heard the governor talk about. Lengthy prison terms are also driving up the number of people behind bars. 20% of our prison population have been locked down longer than 10 years. One of the primary differences between us and other states is that we've cut off people eligibility for a lot of prisoners, parole eligibility for a lot of prisoners. It's just the last 10 years, in just the last 10 years, the legislature, as you heard the governor say, passed 80 new restrictions on parole eligibility, making less people eligible for parole. Adopting a felony class system to reduce uncertainty in sentencing release is one of the things, and again, you heard the governor. I'm being a little redundant, but I think it's worth it. You'll probably hear a lot more of this as we move into the legislative process. So the things that we are recommending, again, is adopting a felony class system, improving the victim services, expanding alternatives to prison, revising drug and property penalties and habitual offender penalties to target higher-level offenders, expanding parole eligibility, using evidence-based incentives and sanctions for those supervised in the community, clearing away barriers to reentry, expanding incentives for inmates to participate in workforce development, and reinvesting a substantial portion of the dollars saved into research-backed programs that change criminal behavior and support victims. You directed us, Governor, to chart a data-driven course for comprehensive reform. This is a data-driven course, and these reforms are comprehensive. If adopted into law, we project that we reduce the prison population by 13% and reduce the community supervision population by 16% over the next 10 years. Now's the time to act and to make the bold legislative changes and financial investments that will make meaningful change to our criminal justice system, that build upon and enhance the previous changes we have already made, that are working to reduce incarceration while at the same time maintaining and preserving public safety. It has been an honor to chair this task force. I look forward to working with the legislature during the 2017 session and to working with you all that are involved in this. Y'all heard that enough, and I'll continue to say that we have to keep everybody involved in this process. And again, I want to thank the governor for giving me this opportunity and for the support that he's shown for this task force and for our department, Governor. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Chief Justice Burnett Johnson, and it's been my privilege to serve on this Justice Reinvestment Task Force. Let me thank the judges who've participated, Judge Bonnie Jackson, Judge Laurie Landry, Judge Laurie White, and my proxy, Judge Wicker. It takes time away from trials for judges to participate in various boards and commissions, and I certainly appreciate the work that they've done with this commission. Everything that we do as judges is extra. The drug courts that we operate, the reentry courts that we operate, all of the things that we do that impact our incarceration rates is in addition to a trial docket. And we're happy to do it. And the judiciary, we are firm in supporting the governor, Secretary LeBlanc, and the legislature in terms of getting our numbers down, because we want to be smart about what we're doing. We are competitive people. We want to be the best instead of the worst. So why would we want to be number one in terms of the numbers that we incarcerate? It's nothing to be proud of. We accomplish nothing. We're not safer as a result, and we're spending absolutely more money than we need to. And so we, in the judiciary, support this package of reforms. It's going to make our state better. And we in Louisiana want to see that happen. I did mention earlier a dissent that I wrote in 1998 where a defendant in New Orleans who had some drug convictions was convicted for stealing a pair of $5 tennis shoes in New Orleans from a Dollar General store. To date, he was sentenced to 26 years and 8 months, and to date, the state of Louisiana has spent $665,000 to incarcerate this one defendant for a $5 offense. Now, we've got to be smarter than this. We really must be smarter than this. We've got to get a handle on our drug addictions, because most of the people that we incarcerate are there for drug addictions. At one time, we could say the word crack cocaine and everybody said, oh my God, let's lock them up. Well, now we're dealing with not crack cocaine, but heroin and opiates. And so these folk need to be rehabilitated. It's not a problem just here, it's Maine and other states. We've got to be smart about rehabilitating drug offenders rather than locking them up, because these are lives that can be saved. These people can be rehabilitated. They can go back home, they can get jobs, they can support their families, and they can pay taxes, and that's the right thing to do. So I support the work of this commission, which is why I've taken all of this time to be a part of these various meetings, town hall meetings, and it's just been my pleasure to work with all of the members of this commission. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you, Chief Justice Johnson, and to the whole task force. Much appreciated all of your work. The primary purpose for individuals to come together to form a government is their own security. It's why government was started in the first place, and yet public safety continues to be one of the most pressing matters in the state of Louisiana and the most pressing matter in my city of New Orleans. I've spent the vast majority of my adult life attempting to fight crime, but there is a distinct difference between jailing defendants and fighting crime. What this task force has done is set a path forward that actually fights crime and works to reduce recidivism, reduce the prison population over time, save the state money, and result in better and stronger communities across the board. Without the work of this task force, moving forward with this type of legislation would not be possible. These are things that many of us have fought for nearly a decade, and yet now the momentum is finally here so that we can address some of our most pressing needs. Specifically, during this legislative session, I will be offering legislation that will mandate data collection and track performance to monitor implementation and outcomes of these reforms enacted. That bill will also include a requirement that DOC calculates savings and that we reinvest those savings in a substantial amount, more than 50%, towards data-driven, evidence-based programming to reduce crime, protect victims, and responsibly invest taxpayers' public safety tax dollars. The rest of this process is on the legislature. It's in our power to file as many bills as legislators feel necessary to tackle the recommendations in this task force report, and we'll debate those issues in this upcoming session beginning on April the 10th. Ultimately, the legislature will be the arbiters of what becomes state policy after this data-driven process has been completed. For too long, the committees on criminal justice have listened to stories and anecdote and made decisions on policy that have taken us in the direction that we have finally reached this point. It doesn't have to be this way, and I know that because it hasn't always been this way. In 1965, Louisiana ranked 13th in incarceration, and in 2005, we became the incarceration leader of the nation. We can make a change. There will be legislation offered that can help us get there. It will reduce crime, make our communities safer, and allow us to move forward on priorities that need to be met so that we can have the kind of communities that the people of this state deserve. Thank you all for your leadership on this effort.
Thank you, Governor and members. Our objective as members of the task force was to recommend systemic changes to the criminal justice system for the legislature's consideration. I think we've done an extraordinary job at providing a starting point for the legislator's process with regard to evaluating those recommendations. My great hope remains that we eliminate the revolving door of recidivism that plagues 35% of every released inmate in the state of Louisiana who return not only to crime, but to prison within 3 years. A 35% number is extraordinarily high, and it's a very costly, it's a very poor return on taxpayer investment, and a very costly method of doing public policy and corrections in the state of Louisiana. I believe with this report we're going to explore opportunities that we've missed in the past for both rehabilitation and restoration of lives, and the cost to taxpayers can be actually reduced. So this package should have something for everybody, not only to celebrate, but to get behind and to be a part of. Research still demonstrates that long-term incarceration works well for a percentage of the population that we currently house in our correction system. However, for the roughly 18,000 that are released each year, 35% of those will be back in prison within 3 years. That's extraordinarily too high. And it's my hope that that's where we can focus our attention through the reinvestment task force, through some of the addiction programs, through the drug court. Their focus in these programs on educational, vocational, and moral rehabilitation and social skill development is priceless. And to the Louisiana taxpayer, I would echo this one theme. Those are not optional programs. Those are not just unnecessary luxuries, but they're necessities to the rehabilitation of a life, to benefit prisoners, to benefit their families, but also to benefit public safety. If you did the math, if we simply cut recidivism by 50%, and by the way, that's not an extraordinary number. Oregon's is below 50% of ours now, at 17%. Louisiana could save tens of millions of dollars a year, change the trajectory of numbers of families on both sides of the crime equation, and over a 10-year period, reduce the prison population substantially. My hope is not that we get soft on crime, but smart on rehabilitation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Craig Weber, and I've had the pleasure and honor of serving as the Sheriff of Lafourche Parish for the past 25 years and have cumulative 35 years of law enforcement experience. First and foremost, I want to recognize and commend the gentleman to my left, our governor. Without his support and leadership on this issue, the good work of this task force and the report would end up like many such reports on a shelf somewhere collecting dust. So Governor Edwards, thank you so much. I certainly want to recognize our Secretary, Jim LeBlanc, for his leadership as the chairman of the task force, my friend and my colleague, Sheriff Mike Kaz of West Baton Rouge, who has been a leader in the area of innovative corrections, and all of the members of the task force who have put forth a tremendous amount of effort and a great result. I have grown frustrated and weary of having people come into my jail and serve a life sentence 6 months or 30 days at a time. I've never had an ambulance or a police car pull up to the jail, pull someone out who's having a heart attack or broke their leg and say, "They're your problem." But every day, our jails are full of people who are bipolar, suffer from schizophrenia, and other mental health conditions. And they're in the worst environment they can be, sapping precious resources rather than being in a community-based or inpatient treatment facility addressing their needs. We shouldn't incarcerate people just because they're poor, or just because they're addicted, or just because they don't have a home. But we've done that. For way too long. And now we have an opportunity to reverse that trend. Now we know that we can smartly assess people with statistically valid and reliable instruments and identify the root causes and the issues of why they find themselves arrested and incarcerated. We know that we can individualize intervention strategies and case management. We know that we can use the resources within the criminal justice system and outside of the criminal justice system to produce a better result. We know that because other people are doing it successfully. This is not a hypothesis. This is a proven fact. So I appreciate the work of this task force in bringing these best practices, these evidence-based solutions, these alternatives to incarceration to produce better results. I also appreciate the reinvestment piece, the fact that the dollars that are saved from not incarcerating people that Chief Justice Johnson described a few minutes ago can go into those treatment programs and how we sequence and how we add dosages. You know, sheriffs are unique in the criminal justice system because, on the one hand, we protect and serve. We have the responsibility of crime prevention, investigating crime, and apprehending criminals. On the other hand, we operate the jails, where most people will experience their first incarceration of their life and many others subsequent to that. We also have an opportunity to partner and have partnered previously well with our Department of Corrections, because the best intervention strategies are on a local level in the communities that people come from and they will return to. And in many cases, that'll be through the use of a jail, working with the Department of Corrections. So I'm very optimistic and very pleased to see that as a state, we're taking steps forward to do what others have done successfully. And as the goal of a sheriff, to reduce crime, to have a safe community, to improve the quality of life of the people that we serve, I am convinced that the initiatives that we implement in how we address people who are convicted of crimes, who are incarcerated, who need to be treated, will ultimately have as great of an impact, if not a greater impact, in reducing crime, in keeping our community safe. Because if a person comes to my jail with 30 or 40 or 50 prior arrests, that means 30 or 40 or 50 people have been victimized. But if we can stop it after the second or third arrest, we're going to reduce crime in greater proportions than we've ever seen before. So with that, I want to say we know we can do better. We know we need to do better. Now let's go do better.
Okay, at this time, we are going to take a few questions, if you have any. Well, questions from the media. I needed to be, there's too many in the room to branch beyond that. Yes, ma'am.
So one of the big differences between Louisiana and other states is that we do have so many of our state prisoners in local sheriff's housing, which I think complicates kind of reducing our prison population, because a lot of sheriffs are either depending on, have gotten used to the revenue that they get from state prisoners being housed with them. So what are you all doing to address that problem that's different than what other states have dealt with?
Well, it is a good question, and for those of you who didn't hear it, she's asking about the fact that I think it's 50%, is that right, of our state inmates are being housed in parish jails rather than in state prisons. And we should always remember how that came to be. A few decades ago, when the state decided we were going to be very tough on crime and imprison a lot of people, it also decided it didn't want to build the prisons to accommodate that prison population, and decided rather than do that, we would encourage sheriffs to house our inmates so that we wouldn't have to pay as much. And so we put them on a per diem that, quite frankly, is too low to allow them to provide the services and the treatments and the reentry programs and other things that are necessary to ensure that when those 50% of our prison population do reenter society, as we know 95% of all of them will, that they're properly equipped for success. And so one of the most essential things is the reinvestment. When we identify savings, we have to invest that. Part of that will go to increasing the per diem, in exchange for which the sheriffs are going to make sure that they are doing a better job. And so when we talk about sheriffs using state inmates and state dollars through the per diems to run their jails, we should always be fair and remember that they are doing exactly what we asked them to do as a state decades ago. And many sheriffs have gone out and incurred debt in order to build those jails to house our inmates at our request, and we have to be mindful of that as well. But they are a huge part of this, and that's why I'm so pleased to have Sheriff Weber up here today, and many sheriffs around the state. So we're going to be smart and methodical when we do this, but the short answer to that question is that the reinvestment is critically important to success, and part of that reinvestment, which hopefully will be approximately 70% of all savings realized, will be to increase that sheriff's per diem, in exchange for which they have to provide better services. A quick follow-up, yes, ma'am.
Is that supposed to also compensate them for the loss in the garnish, the portion of the wage that they get from the inmates that are housed with them?
I'm not understanding that question. And I apologize, but
Do you mind if I?
no, go right ahead.
So this is the deal. You got 104 jails that are housing inmates. And I don't know what the number is offhand, as the governor just mentioned. There's probably 10% of that, maybe 20% in that neighborhood that invested building prisons at the local level. Those are the ones that we have to concentrate our efforts on. There are a lot of jails that are housing 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 offenders that are using them locally for maintenance and those kind of things. So they're not dependent on that. So there's a good percentage of sheriffs that aren't depending on the economic side of this. So that's got to be an organized effort, as the governor said. It does, and the per diem will help. We have right now 13 closed facilities at the local level because we have 5,000 less inmates at the end of February than we did in 2012. And that's what happens. Compartments of prisons may have to shut down, but not the entire prison to do what we're trying to do. And as you heard Sheriff Weber said, it's really not if you it's kind of making lemonade out of lemon. Going back to our local communities through the jail is not a bad way to do things. But we got a lot of logistical issues to deal with there, but it can be accomplished, and that's what these reentry centers that I talked about are about, is at the local level with the sheriffs in partnership, as the governor mentioned.
One last question from the media.
Well, maybe not. God bless you. Everybody have a great day.